All right, so we'll see how this goes. Anyway, personality disorders. So in your test, you've basically got 10 questions. You need to understand what the personality disorders under the clusters are and what the clusters are. You've got to be able to kind of differentiate the main kind of signs and symptoms of the different personality disorders under the clusters. Um, Understand the nursing process, kind of the kind of things that you do, including the therapeutic communication. All right. So personality disorders, they're just basically enduring patterns of experiences and behavior which kind of leads to how people behave. They're kind of clusters. Um, let's move on. Um, so the main clusters. So you got the A, B, and C basically. So A's are kind of odd and eccentric people. That's your paranoid, the schizoid, and the schizotypal. B are the dramatic and emotional ones, and C are the anxious and fearful. So remember the difference between A and C. A is kind of odd, eccentric, and C is anxious or fearful. Okay. So cluster A. I'm just going to whip through this because you know you've done lectures and you've had tutoring already. Um, but it's kind of important to kind of understand the main characteristics. So paranoid personality, this isn't the same as schizophrenia, but this is a personality characteristic. So it's enduring. When it's a personality characteristic, it's something that endures. In something like kind of a disorder that's not a personality disorder, it's not necessarily enduring. When medication is taken or symptoms can be relieved. But this is actually kind of characteristic, like a way of interpreting the world. So paranoid personality disorder, mistrust of others, they seek relationships that hold power. They kind of see themselves as important to some extent. You see some crossover between disorders. They tend to be like very vigilant, a bit about people taking control away from them. Tend to not do very well in jobs. If they feel kind of powerless and vulnerable, then that's kind of negative, and they tend to have low insight into things that are going on. All right, so they're kind of just not trusting people. So here's another little cartoon here. So they think others are out to get them. Have a little look at this. They kind of read negatively into praise. They hold grudges. They're suspicious. Um, I can tell you stories about some of these. I'm not gonna record stories, but like in terms of clients I've seen, they kind of doubt the loyalty of others. Um, Schizoid. So sometimes people kind of struggle with the difference between schizoid and schizotypal. Schizoid is they're just very disengaged, very introverted, very detached. They have no interest in other people. They tend to do solitary jobs, have difficulty making friends. Um, they tend to kind of, attach. Sometimes have animals, but they won't marry. Um, Very low self-esteem. So one of the social interaction is pretty poor. In terms of nursing interventions, you can work to kind of enhance their pleasure or prevent isolation. Uh, but you have to balance the um, social interaction. They're pretty uncomfortable. So here you go. So they don't desire close relationships, little interest in romantic relationships, choose solitary activities, lack strong emotions, emotional coldness. Schizotypal, these ones, so it's schizotypal. So think of it like it's a type of personality disorder like schizophrenia. Okay, so a type of personality disorder a bit like schizophrenia, schizotypal, and that's kind of how you remember the difference between schizoid and schizotypal. All right. So basically, they tend to have kind of some characteristics, magical beliefs, kind of delusions. Um, they tend to last a very short period of time. What you're going to see with schizophrenia and the differentiation in that is it's to do with the duration as to what disorder you actually end up being characterized with. So these kind of tend to be odd people, unkempt dress, odd mannerisms. Um, when they get stressed, they can have psychotic episodes, and it can last kind of minutes to hours. But it's too short to diagnose someone with schizophrenia, and a lot of them have symptoms as well. All right, so I won't go into the smaller grey matter and stuff. You don't need to know that stuff for your exam, but the social isolation, they have ineffective coping. Um, They're risk of suicide. They have ideas of reference. Ideas of reference. So, say for like psychotic disorders, means like you're like watching TV or something, and you think it's ref talking to you. So you think the TV's talking to you. All right. Um, then I think this one's you know here here's a good one, number two. Odd beliefs, magical thinking. Um, Magical thinking, is kind of like if I an example, if I stand up, the world's going to end. If I sit down, um, my dog's going to die. That would be like an extreme form, an actual one I've seen. Um, so odd thinking and speech, odd eccentric appearance, social anxieties associated with paranoid fears. All right. So what you actually will find is that both schizotypal and schizoid personality people will tend to avoid other people. All right. So if you had a question, either of them could avoid other people. Um, Paranoid are going to tend to have a negative interpretation of what's going on. But there you are. So that's your cluster A's. So they're kind of like the odd types. Cluster B, these are the ones that are kind of emotional and act out and stuff like that. Borderline personality disorder. Um, this is kind of one of the ones that traditionally has taken up a lot of work staff time, um, and units used to be very full of people with borderline personality disorder because they have real trouble regulating their mood, maintaining relationships, and they can be quite impulsive and destructive. You'll often see, self-harm and stuff like that in people with exhibiting borderline personality disorder. So, struggle with their identity. Um, oh, hang on, I got that in here somewhere. That should be the borderline one. I don't know where that one is. Anyway, so diagnosis, five or more things. They work to avoid abandonment. Um, they have an unstable self-image. They're impulsive. They kind of have inappropriate responses to things. And what you see is these are kind of extremes of dichotomous thinking. So this is important to know because this is something, for example, that might come up in nursing care. So, when they say good, bad, it's kind of not in between. Most people kind of think on a grey in between things. And this is dichotomous thinking has two extremes. So you're either good or bad. So a classic example is like, you're the best, like a patient would be like, you're the best therapist ever, and then, something happens and then, oh, they're the worst one ever, and it goes like that. My old boss used to say to people, at the moment you think I'm wonderful, but you know, it is going to swap to the other side. And when that happens, I'm going to tell you, okay? Because you have kind of one of your struggles is the bits in between. And what I used to say to patients is, I know that you're very sensitive, because people can hear being called sensitive quite easily. Um, whereas like, that's kind of a way that people can understand in a non-threatening way about those kind of changes and taking things to heart. I tend to be impulsive, self-harm. Um, it tends to be more women than men, and often, with childhood sexual abuse. A lot of personality disorder stuff is linked in with early childhood because, um, that's formative experiences, and what can happen early on in your attachments and stuff like that can then affect your neurological development. So, well, there we are. It's hard for me to stay on track sometimes. But the classic, probably one of the most effective interventions would be kind of DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. Um, so one classic thing is splitting as a defense mechanism. It's been talked about before, um, and splitting is where basically you have extremes. So what you might see in terms of a nursing care thing and a question might be along the lines of, splitting would look like, one nurse, you're the best nurse, another nurse, oh, they're terrible nurses, and then they kind of split the two apart in that way. And it also can be, so it's worth understanding that because that's a question area. So important things for nursing care, establish boundaries, um, document, share treatment plans, confront violations, but it's important not to be punishing and punitive. All right. And kind of discuss it. So here it says, when patient violates, clearly state what's wrong. I feel uncomfortable with this is a professional relationship. This action is of an intimate relationship, which we will never have. So borderline personality disorder, they have frantic efforts to avoid abandonment, unstable relationships with extreme idealization. It's our first date, but he's the one. Extreme devaluation. You don't care about me, and all that kind of stuff. Potentially self-damaging impulsivity, suicidal threats to manipulate others, chronic feelings of emptiness. These patients tend to be really having a hard time. And social personality disorder. These are your sociopaths and psychopaths. You know, I won't go into stuff into but they kind of be impulsive, deceitful, lying, and they tend to not have any feelings. They lack empathy. It tends to be younger people. They're impulsive and irresponsible. Da 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 da. It's synonymous with being criminal, but you don't necessarily have to be criminal. So they disregard rights of others. They're deceitful, reckless disregard for safety, consistently irresponsible, lack remorse. Histrionic personality disorder tend to be women, very attention-seeking, excited and emotional. They're the life of the party, the center of attention, quick to form relationships, but they're quite demanding and they can alienate people, dress seductively for attention. So wants consistent attention and praise, inappropriately seductive, displays of shallow emotions, use physical appearance to draw, attention to self, exaggerate expression of emotion, easily influenced by others. So what do? You reinforce their personal strengths, right? You're developing their confidence in dealing with situations, and you want to reinforce their positive personality traits. Assertiveness groups can be used for that. But I jumped on. Anyway, so I'm still on the previous histrionic. So for example, say someone comes out of their room, they're dressed inappropriately, short dress, male or female, and or any other, and no underwear or whatever. You take them back into their room, get them to dress appropriately. All right. Narcissistic personality disorder. They tend to be grandiose, need admiration, they lack empathy. They're preoccupied with their success, power, and how wonderful they are, and I'm the best ever, and kind of overlaps a bit with borderline personality and antisocial as well. So grandiose sense of importance requires excessive admiration, believes special, unique to high status, sense of entitlement, lacks empathy, envious of others. Right, so those are your Bs, right? So your Cs, these are kind of your avoidant is the first one. So this is one which kind of stays out of social situations. So they're very sensitive to criticism, very low self-esteem. And any negative thing, they kind of take that really to heart. They kind of see themselves as inferior. So avoid activities due to increased fear of criticism, restraint in intimate relationships, preoccupied with being rejected, view self as inferior to others, reluctant to take risks. Okay. So that's dependent is another one. So this is where someone who clings to others, they're very submissive. They are a risk for suicide and being persuaded. They want other people to make the choices for them. So they depend on others. Dependent being I'm dependent on someone else to make all my decisions in my life. So very here you are. So here's an example. Difficulty making everyday decisions, need others to assume responsibility, feel uncomfortable and helpless when alone, urgently seeks another relationship, unrealistically preoccupied with fears of having to take care of the self. Okay. And obsessive compulsive. So this isn't the same as obsessive compulsive disorder. This is obsessive compulsive personality disorder. But it says their personality characteristics. So they don't tend to have like obsession and compulsion. Rather, they're kind of obsessed with being orderly and perfectionist. They're very controlling. They have a capacity to delay rewards. And if you remember in OCD, they don't, but they want a very highly structured, organized life. Right? They're very rigid. One of the theories is, parental over control as a child. So they're preoccupied with details, excessively devoted to work, unable to discard worn out or worthless objects. There you go. So they're just very rigid. All right. Other ones, opposition. These are the kids ones. Oppositional defiant. I don't think you probably. Well, I don't know. Oppositional defiant is like it's kids that don't like to be told stuff. They're disobedient. They have angry outbursts. Low frustration tolerance. Conduct disorder though tends to be like, you know, this is your budding sociopaths. They tend to be destructive of property, aggressive, cruel to animals. The triad is like bedwetting, cruelty to animals, and fire setting for sociopaths when they get older. Multisystemic therapy, I'm a multisystemic therapist. That's the treatment of choice for conduct issues in kids. Intermittent explosive disorder. This is basically, you know, people that have episodes of aggression out of proportion with what's culturally acceptable. So, like, say for example, you know, you're around my house, you eat my ice cream, and I go absolutely nuts. Oh my God, you eat my ice cream! I start smashing up the house, you know, like trashing everything. You know, that's out of proportion, right? So, you know, it's increased risk of suicidality, but it's just these really over the top responses. Kleptomania and pyromania. Pyromania is like setting fires, it tends to be men. Kleptomania is stealing. You know, it's heavily linked in with depression as well. Okay, so that's just a quick oversight of those disorders. I don't know if that's helpful or not. It's not really exactly how I would do tutoring, but we'll see. Anyway, see what you think, and if that's helpful, and then or what's not helpful, and then if you need something more, I can fill in any other blanks and stuff like that, or do the other ones. Just let me know.